Okay, so spotlight and backlight modes. Steady shot. Now this camcorder has got a variety of different steady shot modes, and you'll want to pay attention to these steady shot modes. So let's go into our steady shot mode and we can see what's happening here. First of all, we have a steady shot enable mode, and I've currently got it turned in the off mode. I've got it off because the camera is on a tripod and we don't need steady shot. If you're on a tripod and the camera is locked down and it's a fairly stable surface, there's no need for steady shot. Steady shot actually works against you when you're locked down because it will soften up your picture, and that's not something we want. Then we have a standard steady shot mode, and then we've got a very aggressive or active steady shot mode. So when we're in standard steady shot modes, we've got a number of different choices here. First of all, we've got the choices of steady shot. Okay, next we've got steady shot type, and we can have it be a very hard steady shot, a medium steady shot, or a soft steady shot. If we use the hard steady shot, it's going to soften up the picture just a little bit, and we might even see a little bit of distortion happening around the edges of our pictures. But these are really great when we're shooting highly active kinds of things. Soft steady shot, on the other end of the scale, what it's going to do is it's barely going to touch anything in our picture. So maybe you're looking for that handheld look, but you want to smooth it out just a little bit. This is really common in features today where we've got a moving camera with just a tiny bit of steady shot applied. This is a great mode to use. Now, if you're using a wide-angle adapter lens, such as those available from Schneider Optics or maybe Band Pro and some of the other companies that are out there, you're going to want to use the wide conversion mode for your steady shot. And this is where it's most effective. It's actually most effective always at the widest portion of the lens, where it can really settle things down, whether you're using that wide-angle adapter or not. So let's click back out of here. And let's go down to our active steady shot type. Now, active steady shot is where it's a really aggressive steady shot type, and we've either got a standard mode or we've got a wide conversion mode that you can see here. If you're shooting into something that's really active and we really want to crank it down hard, this active steady shot works very, very well. It does its best work at the widest end of the lens, but it works in any situation. Just be aware, it's terribly aggressive, and it will soften up your picture, and it might distort the edges of your picture just a little bit. You might even see some pictures running, in other words, bleeding it just a tad, if you're not aware of what that might look like. So be careful in using these active steady shot modes or the aggressive steady shot modes. Again, if you're shooting on a tripod, no steady shot is necessary. If you're in an environment that's really, really bouncy, you might want to use the active modes. If you're in a normal environment, a handheld environment, and you're trying to be careful and you're a little bit experienced with the camcorder, you're going to be just fine with standard steady shot modes. Now, all that said, the active steady shot modes might be an artistic choice. Maybe you're looking for something that's a little bit choppy and smooth at the same time. So play around with it and see how it works for you. You might find that you like it as a production choice or metaphor. Get out of these modes here. Okay, manual focus assist. The manual focus assist works where we've got the camera in an autofocus mode and we want to manually assist that camcorder in focusing on something temporarily. So we can use the manual focus assist on this camcorder to let us temporarily take over the focus, but it's not something that you have full focus. In other words, as soon as you stop being active with the focus ring, the camcorder is going to take right back over with its focus mode. So this can be turned on or off. Next up is our focus macro control. Now, this is a pretty simple control to use. Basically, if you're trying to focus in on something that you've zoomed in on that's closer than about 2.5 feet, we're going to turn on the focus macro, and it's going to let us zoom in and focus on anything that's within that 2-foot span or that 2.5-foot range. So it's a really great feature that way. If we're not focused in on something that's 2.5 feet away, then anything that's in the background, of course, is going to be really blurred. This is great for creating super tight close-ups of an object, but if we're outside of that 2.5-foot range or radius, then it's really not going to work for us. So this is one of those features that you can enable and disable depending on what it is that you're trying to shoot. The focus macro button or focus macro feature can be assigned to a button. Moving down, we have the handle zoom mode. Now here's where we can control the zoom of what's happening with the rocker on the top of the camcorder. So we can set this up for maximum speed or set it up for its slowest speed, depending on what it is that you need in the camcorder. Click through here. Speed zoom. Now, this is a feature that is not found in most of the other camcorders. What this allows us to do is assign super speed to the rocker that's on the right-hand side of the camcorder. It's great. It really lets you zoom in quickly. You can go from one end of the lens to the other end of the lens in under 2 seconds, but not without a cost. And that cost is that it's a little bit noisy as those gears drive through at that super high speed. So the trade-off is if you're using the on-camera microphone, either a mounted shotgun mic or the front microphone on the camcorder, it's very likely that you're going to pick up some zoom noise. So be aware that if you're using the speed zoom setting, it's a great artistic choice, but if you're using on-camera microphones, it's going to be picked up. You're going to hear a little bit of a grinding or a growling noise as it goes through. But if you're using a wireless microphone or you're feeding off of a mixer or off of some kind of an external recording device, don't worry about it. Go ahead and use it for your speed zoom purposes. I'm going to leave this set to off for the time being. Next, digital extender. What this does is it allows us to have a digital zoom factor, and it's going to increase our zoom by 10 times. Well, I'm not a big fan of digital zooms ever because they pixelate the image and they soften the image up. This camcorder already does a 20x or 20 times zoom optical, and so there's really no benefit in my mind to increasing it all the way out. If you need to get a better picture with a longer reach, you might want to consider getting a telephoto adapter to go on the front end of the camcorder. That might be a better choice. But if it's just a 1 or 2 shot thing, you might use that digital extender to give us a digital zoom at the end. I'm going to leave this set to off for my particular uses. The fader. This is another feature that I don't use, but it's one that a lot of people may use. What this does is every time we hit stop in the record mode, it'll either fade to black or fade to white. So we're going to go into this mode. We can choose white fader or we can choose black fader. So at the end of every record sequence, it's going to fade it down to black or fade it down to white. This might be something that you need for doing in-camera edits, or maybe you're doing some in-camera cutting. But otherwise, I like saving those fades for the NLE, and that leaves me more creative choices. You'll decide what works best for you. Next up is XV Color. XV Color is an expanded gamut. That means that we've got more colors available to us, but not all HD displays, especially the older ones, support XV or deep color. So depending on your shooting and your destination mode, you may or may not enable XV Color. Now, if we've got picture profiles that are enabled, we lose the XV Color capability. So if you aren't able to access your XV Color, you might want to be sure that you've turned off your picture profiles. So my picture profiles are currently set to off. Let's go back to our menu mode here. Now, even if you don't have a display that supports XV Color, you may consider recording with XV Color engaged anyway, because you might be using the media later on, or if you're going to be out processing to a Blu-ray DVD or some other format that allows for those deeper colors, it's great to have that data there. It won't show up on displays that don't have it, and in fact, it's possible, though unlikely, that XV Color may shift your color just a little bit when it's being viewed on non-XV Color, non-deep color capable displays. It's not something that you should need to worry about very much. Okay, coming on down, color bars. We can have the camcorder output color bars in 4 different modes. So we've got type 1 through 4. We can also turn on a 1K tone at -20 dB. So if you're looking to stripe your tape at the front end with color bars and tones, or print color bar and tone to the front end of your tape when we're delivering to a broadcaster via a tape mechanism such as D5 or HDCAM, or it might be that the broadcaster is requiring bars and tone at the front of a digital file. This is where we'll put those in to the camcorder. So there's where we'll turn these on and off. And color bars can be assigned to a button on the side of the camcorder if that's something that you'd like to assign. That gets us through the first menu selection in this camcorder. Next, we're going to dive into our record and our output modes that the camcorder is capable of. Ready? Let's dial in. This is where we're going to set up the signal that the camcorder is going to record. In other words, the resolution and the frame rate that the camcorder is going to record down to the flash media. And we're going to set up what the output block, in other words, the SDI or the HDMI or the component outputs on the camcorder, are going to be putting out over that particular pipe. So let's dive into that particular menu. Let's get into our menu here. We're going to flip back down our screen there. And let's scroll down to the record and output setups. Now the first choice that we have is our record setup. We can record in either SD or in HD. So we'll move off to the side here and we can see that we can record to SD or HD in the block here. And as we press that, it resets or reboots the internal segments of the camcorder. It takes it just a moment to get back into those modes. We'll go back into our menu options here. And we've selected our record mode. So next up, we're going to hit our record format. So down to record format, hit our menu, and you'll notice that on the right-hand side of the screen it's grayed out, and that's because we're only in HD modes right here. So the camcorder is capable of recording both HD and SD as mentioned before in that first menu choice. Since we're in HD mode, the SD modes are grayed out so that we can't see them. Now the first thing you'll notice is that when we're dealing with the 1080 modes, we've got several different qualities that we can record at. We can record in what's called the FX mode, that's at 24 megabits per second. We can record in FH mode, we can record in FQ and in LP mode. So we've got quite a few different modes available to us on the camcorder. The first mode that we have available to us is the 1080 6DI mode in FX. The FX mode means that we're recording at 24 megabits per second. And then we can slide down to the FH mode, to HQ mode, and then finally to the LP mode. Now we only have these in the 1080 6DI modes. We don't have these multiple modes available in 30p or 24p. So the next things up on the menu are 30p where we're recording in FX or FH mode, and then 24p with FX or FH mode. We don't have those long play modes. So where would we use these lower modes like the HQ and the LP? Well, if you're shooting something that doesn't have a lot of action and it's a fairly static subject, for instance, maybe it's a corporate talking head and we need a long recording time. Maybe it's a 3-hour conference and we don't have a lot of media and we don't have the 120 gig pack that can go on the side of the camcorder. It's a good idea to maybe use one of these lower modes. Or maybe you're looking for something that's highly compressed but fairly easy to edit, and your computer system isn't capable of dealing with 24 megabits, but it has no problem dealing with, say, 7 or 9 or 5 megabits per second. So you might use it for that where you're going up to the web, again with that static image. The higher the bit rate, the higher the quality of the image. So it's important that if you're dealing with finely detailed, high-moving objects or subjects, such as water or things that involve sunlight or lots of motion, etc., then we want to be using that FX mode. Let's take it all the way up to the full 24 megabits that the camcorder is capable of dealing with. But otherwise, you can dial it down if you can find benefit to doing that. So back to the modes. Remember, in the 1080 6DI modes, we've got 4 different methods that we can record, or bandwidths that we can record. When we're dealing with 30p, we've got 2. When we're dealing with 24p, we've also got 2 modes. So let's continue to look at some of the other modes that are available to us in this camcorder. Let's slide down and you can see as we get past 24p, we start getting into 720p. In the 720p modes, we've got a couple of options. We can record at 720 60p, that's 60 progressive frames per second. And again, you'll notice that we have 2 quality options available to us here. And that gets us through the different modes that we've got available in the camcorder. So we really can do quite a bit with this camcorder. This gets us through all of the different recording modes that the camcorder has. Choose what's best for you. Most of my recording's done in 30p or 24p. You might want to play with some of these different modes and see what works best for you. Let's get out of this particular menu mode here. So we're going to put this back up into 30p mode. Takes the camera just a moment to reboot. We'll go back to our menu settings once we're out of there. And we'll get back to our video output block. So in video output, we've got some options here. First of all, we can choose which output select that we'd like to work with. So switch that over and we can choose SDI, HDMI component, or video. Now the composite output that's on here, that's the yellow connector, that's always active and always outputting an SD signal no matter what format we're using for the other outputs on the camcorder. So that's why that's not part of this menu selector. So we can choose the component mode, we can choose HDMI, we can choose the SDI on the base here. So let's go ahead and leave it set to HDMI. And we can set up what the output resolution is going to be. So we can have it be 720p or 480. We can have it be 480p, 480i, or 1080. So we've got the choices there depending on what kind of a monitor that we're feeding. We're going to leave that set to 1080. Downconvert. So as this is down converting the HD signal down to an SD signal, we have some choices here. We can either choose to squeeze in the widescreen signal into a 4:3 signal like we'd see on a standard television display. We can choose to cut it so that it's a standard 16:9 or a 15:9 or a 14:9 output on the display. So it's going to crop the information while retaining the original aspect ratio. We can also pillar box. In other words, we can put black bars on either side of that picture if that's what we want. So we've got some choices that we can access here. I've got mine set up for standard letterboxing, but you can see that we've got a number of different choices here as we roll through it. I'm going to leave mine set to standard letterbox 16:9. And then finally, Sdi Setup. We've got a few different choices here. First of all, the video index. Do we want to send that out over the SDI pipe, or do we want to set this up so that we're outputting our timecode information? And then finally, our VITC. We can turn all of this on. The VITC is set by default to 16, but you can vary that depending on what your facility's requirements are. So that gets us through the record format and the output block segment of this camcorder's menu. Let's move on, and we're going to get into some of the other menu selections next. Next up is the audio menu block, and there's a lot of important things to set in here, so you'll want to pay particular attention to a couple things because this may affect how your NLE or your editing system is capable of working with the stream that comes off of this camcorder. So let's get into the audio menu. This is the menu that looks like the pair of musical notes. And so let's click into here, and first of all, you'll notice in the audio formats we have two choices. We can record Dolby Digital, in other words AC3 files, and that's really what the ADC HD spec calls for, or we can record linear PCM, in other words uncompressed wave-based audio. So this is great. We've got this option here. The problem is some NLE systems do not support the PCM format of audio in an AVC HD stream. So check with your NLE developer or manufacturer to find out if you can support this PCM format. If you can, great. I recommend that you use it. I use Sony Vegas, which does support this particular format, but your application may or may not. So I'm going to leave this set to PCM audio. Next, we're going to go down to our audio limiter. Now you'll notice that I've got the audio limiter set to off. This is because I don't like the camcorder making decisions for me. I like controlling my levels myself. So on the side of the camcorder here, we've got the switches that are found underneath this box, and we can set that up to be auto or manual. I always leave this in manual mode, and I leave the automatic gain control, or I leave the auto limiters off. I'm always using this camcorder in a manual mode. Okay, so I'm going to leave that set to off. Next, headphone out. We've got a couple of options here. We can output stereo or we can output mono. Now I leave this set to stereo because I want to have access to the switch that's found on the back of the camcorder here right underneath the eyepiece, but how you use it may vary for your own particular purposes. Leave that set to stereo, and we'll get into our internal microphone setup. Now this is for this microphone that's on the front, not the external microphone. What this does is it allows us to set up a sensitivity for the microphone, the internal microphone that's on here. And we can set the sensitivity up for normal, or we can set it up to high sensitivity. This really is something that in a professional environment you're probably not going to use very often. If you're shooting, say, something in the back end of a church and you're just looking for some reference audio, you could set this to high sensitivity, and while the audio is not going to sound great, it's going to pick up the more quiet nuances that are in the room, but it's also going to be potentially very noisy. So just be aware of how that sets up. And then below that, we've got the ability to turn on a wind noise reduction circuit. And your mileage may vary with this. Since I'm not going to be using this internal microphone, it really makes no difference whether you leave this set to on or off. How this works best for you is how it's going to work best for you. So let's get out of that menu option. Click up to return. And next, our Xlr setup. Now we've got quite a bit more that we can do in here. First of all, we've got an Xlr audio record link. What this means is that we can have our audios linked together with the automatic gain control. So in other words, if we've got an automatic gain control in place, this means that the automatic gain control is going to work with both channels at the same time. If you're recording stereo or two-channel audio and it's the same source on both channels, in other words, a basic stereo recording, and you do want the AGC enabled, it's important that you set this up so that they're linked. Otherwise, it's possible that the two different AGC circuits will breathe and pump, and they might be actually working against each other or out of time with each other, and that's going to create some problems for us with our audio because it's going to confuse the listener's ear. So I recommend that you put this on separate if you've got two separate audio sources, but if it's the same audio source, two microphones, and put this into the linked mode. Okay. Next, we have audio manual gain. We can set it up so the audio manual gains are separate, or we can have it set up so that the audio manual gain is controlled individually by the two slides that are on the side or the two pots that are on the side. Again, I like leaving these separate because I like having independent control no matter what I'm doing with the camcorder, especially if I'm setting it up to record a split signal for a safety recording. I'm going to leave these in separate mode. Okay. Input trim. Now this is something that you can't really just simply set. It's going to be based on the type of microphone that you choose to work with this particular camcorder. Now the microphone that came in the box with a camcorder, it's a pretty decent microphone, but it's nowhere near as good as some of the third-party tools available from Audio-Technica or Sennheiser or some of the other companies that make great shotgun or hypercardioid mics. So it'll depend on the microphone's sensitivity as to how much you may need to dial up or down this particular trim. All we need to do is select the trim and dial down how far we want that trim to go. So we've got quite a range that we can work with there. We'll go ahead and climb out of there. We've also got a wind reduction circuit available for the external microphones. Now, if you want to use this, great. I'm more of a person that's either going to use a Zeppelin or use a Furry or something, a dead cat on my microphone if I want to get the best wind noise reduction. If you do happen to turn this on and forget that you've left it on, when you go into the status check indicators, the status check indicator will tell us with a small flag that the wind reduction circuitry has been enabled. So if you see the little flag, when you're looking at the status check, you'll see in there that the wind noise circuitry has been engaged. I'm going to leave mine set to off. You click back up to return, and that gets us through all of our audio setup. Next up, we're going to get into the display setups for the camcorder. This is another one of those longer menus, but this is where we set up the kinds of things that we're going to see in our external monitor or in our LCD panel or our EVF, our viewfinder. So grab your camcorder, let's start dialing into those display menus. The display menu options predominantly deal with things that are seen in the LCD or the EVF panel. In very few cases do they relate to anything that actually goes down onto the flash card. So we'll look at what those different options are. So let's first get back into our menu mode here, and let's close down our window. And we're going to come down to our display menu mode. This is the one that looks like the large television. So we'll hit execute or press in on our rotary knob, and this brings us to our first option, which is the zebra. Now the zebra I've currently got set to off. That's because I've got zebra set up so that it's on one of my menu buttons or one of my functionary buttons on the side of the camcorder. I love having zebra control. It tells me when things are exposed properly, or rather it helps me determine proper exposure, especially when I'm in a hurry. So I've got my zebra value set up to a level of 70. That gives us an idea about skin tone. What we really want to expose for, of course, is skin tone. And so I've got this set up to a proper IRE value for skin tone. You can adjust this up and down as much as you'd like, depending on the types of things that you're shooting. So you can see we can adjust this in 5 IRE value increments. And I'm going to leave mine set right there to 70. And I'm going to leave it set to off because of the fact that I do have that assigned to one of my menu buttons. Next is peaking. Peaking is one of my favorite tools, and peaking combined with the expanded focus modes of this camcorder can help you assure that you're going to get great feedback on whatever your focus is, or you can see where your focus is set up. We'll look at how that works in just a second. What peaking does is it'll draw an outline around the contrasting points of whatever object that you're recording if it's in focus. So it's just a focus aid. Now we can set peaking up to be either red, white, or yellow in color. So depending on what you're shooting, that's going to determine the color selections that we're going to choose in this menu. So first of all, it's currently turned off because, again, I've got this assigned to a button. Next we'll come down to color, and here we can choose white, red, or yellow as our peaking indicator color. And I'm going to choose red. And then we can choose the level, and we can set this to high, middle, or low. And really, I like mine set to high because I want a really sharp, very fast indicator of what my focus looks like. So I'm going to turn off the menu here so that we can see exactly how peaking looks when something's in focus. So let's get out of our menu here, turn off menus, and go back to our main view. Now if we zoom in on this shot, we can see that that's blurry and it's out of focus. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn peaking on. I've assigned it to button number 1 on my camcorder. And we'll see the peaking indicator show up right there in the left-hand side of our LCD panel. So currently we have nothing that's in focus, but as we dial closer into focus, we'll start seeing some red lines indicate what's in focus and what isn't. See how that works? And let's use our expanded focus. So we'll jump in with our expanded focus. And as we focus in and out, we can see inside the letters there, little red indicators that show that we're in perfect focus. So we can see exactly what part of the image is in tight focus. We'll come back out of our expanded focus mode. Now we can see a lot more of the peaking that's in there, and we'll just turn peaking off. And there it is, off, peaking on, off, on. Now let's zoom a little ways out in our shot. We can see quite a bit in the red indicator there, indicated in red. So we can see around the microphone and around the film reel what exactly is and is not in focus. So we'll zoom in one more time, peaking off, peaking on. Those little red indicators just really help us know exactly where we're focused in. So peaking is something that I recommend that you assign to one of your menu function buttons. It's something that I've sure found valuable. The color that you're going to choose, well, that's going to depend on what the background or what your subject is. But I like red because red's not something that's typically found in most situations. And white's kind of difficult at times to discern from whatever's in our background. But let's move on. We're going to go back to our menus. We'll shut down our lens here so we can see what's going on. Next are markers. We have 4 different types of markers that we can assign to the electronic viewfinder display or to the LCD panel. We can assign center markers and safety markers, safe area markers, of course, and our aspect ratio markers, or all 4 or a combination thereof. Now markers can be assigned to a function button as well. Now, if you want to keep things centered up, of course, you're probably going to use a center marker. If you're shooting something that's going for a broadcast, you might want to be using one of the safety markers. So let's look at what those look like here. Now, currently, I've got the center marker turned on. We'll go ahead and turn on the aspect marker as well. So let's set this up for a 16:9 aspect ratio. We'll turn on a safety zone as well. Let's give it a fairly wide margin there. So we'll set this up for 90%, and then we'll turn on our guide frame as well. So 16:9 guide frame. Now we've got all of our markers on. So let's turn off our menu and let's go back to our main shot. Now we don't see the markers in there because currently we're in expanded focus mode. You'll notice that markers don't show up when we've got expanded focus turned on. And so here's what happens when we come back out of our expanded focus mode. Into expanded, out from expanded focus. So there's all of our different markers. Now with all of them turned on, it can start to get kind of confusing. So we'll go through and we'll turn on the ones that we really want to have on. Okay, I'm going to turn off the center marker. That's not something that I really need. Okay, and we're going to turn off our guide frame as well. So now we just have safety zone and our aspect ratio markers enabled, and it looks just like that. Now you notice those stay whether we have the display turned on or off. Now again, markers can be assigned to one of the function buttons on the side of the camcorder. And with 7 function buttons and you need markers, you'll probably find a place that you want to assign those to. So let's go ahead and turn off all the markers and let's look at some of the other display menu options that we've got available to us. Back into our menu mode here. Now to markers, and we'll shut markers off. Next, we come down to our expanded focus type. Now here we have two types of expanded focus. The first type, type 1, means that we simply enlarge the image. We've already seen how that works. Then we have type 2, and what type 2 does is it converts the color image into a black and white image. The human eye is a lot better at determining detail when it's looking at something that's in black and white. There's less information there and the contrast is greater. And so having this type 2 mode is really a great way to check for very accurate focus. If you're dealing with fine point focus, this is something that's going to be really important to use. So set this up how you like to best work. I've generally got mine set up for a type 2 focus. Let's go through and turn on type 2. There we go. Next, camera data display. What that means is that we're looking at all of the information about the camera on the screen all the time. I've currently got it turned on. We can turn that off via the display button on the top of our remote block here, or our control block on the top of the camcorder. So it's very easy to turn that on or off. So we can set it in the menu, or we can just simply deal with it on the camera menu itself up on the very top. So you've got a couple of different options that you can use when you're working with your displays. They're real handy to have, but sometimes they can be annoying, and especially if you've got lots of detail on the screen, they can kind of get in the way. Next up, our audio level display. We can again turn this on or off via the display button that's on the top of the camcorder. So you've got more options to be able to turn that on or off depending on what it is that you want to use. And I like having that on all the time, but I'm kind of an audio geek, so I like seeing what's going into my camcorder pretty well at all times. Just to step back so that we can see what's happening there. I currently have this turned all the way off. Let's turn some audio on with the camera here. And now we can see some levels that are happening in our shot. And there's our shot there. We can see we've got audio happening. If we press this display once, we see it go away. So let's bring it back all of our display. This shows us everything that's in the shot. We'll cut this back so that we've got no background. So we'll press the display button once, and it takes off most of our information except for things like our shutter speed and our gain control, our aperture, and it lets me know what special functions I've got activated. If I press display one more time, it goes back to an all plain screen, so the only thing that we see is the record button. Let's go back to our menus here. After the audio level display, we have a zoom display. Now the zoom display can be set up to measure as a bar or as numbers. And here's really the easiest way to explain that. A bar is subjective and a number is very objective. So if you just say to someone, I'd like my zoom set to a value of 70, then we know that we've got our zoom set up to a specific point. Or we could say, why don't you set the zoom so that it's at approximately 3/4 of the zoom depth. Well, that's going to vary just a little bit. So you can set this up to work the way that you would like it to work. Maybe you're somebody who likes to work by the numbers, and maybe you're just somebody who likes to work a little bit more by feel. It's entirely a personal choice. Next, we have got our focus display. Now the focus display can be set up to display feet or meters, depending on the measurement system that you're used to working with. This is a nice feature to have. I leave mine set up for feet because that's the best way that I know how to measure. And our shutter display. The shutter display can be set up to display seconds, such as 1/25th of a second, or 1/60th of a second, or 1/30th of a second, etc. Or we can get it to show degree of angle. So in here we can choose degree, and it'll tell us what the degree of angle is that we're working with. If you're familiar with the still photography world, you're probably going to want to display the shutter speed in seconds, whereas if you come from the film industry, maybe you're more familiar with the degree of angle, and that's the way that you'd rather work. So we have a couple of options, again, for just quick feedback for yourself. And next, we have the ability to adjust the LCD brightness and the LCD color. This is something that you'll want to be aware of. By default, it comes calibrated for the camera, but you might be in a situation where you need to pump up the brightness or you need to pump up the color just a little bit. But be aware, if you set these other than the default setting, you may be setting yourself up for some problems with exposure or problems with saturation, depending on what you're doing with picture profiles and so forth. This is another reason why I recommend that you always use an external monitor with this type of a camcorder so that we can see everything on an external source other than the camcorder itself. You can even make some comparisons back and forth so you're getting an idea of what the camera is seeing, what the LCD display is showing, what the EVF is showing, and what an external monitor is displaying. So we've got some options there. It's a big plus for that HDMI output. But here's where we can adjust that. We also have the same types of options available to us for our EVF function. Now you notice one here for the backlight level of the LCD panel. What this backlight does is if we're in a fairly bright area, maybe we're shooting towards the sun or some bright lights, it might be that we want to add some backlight or some brightness to the backlight in our LCD panel so that we can see it just a little bit better. We're not necessarily using it for critical saturation or exposure settings, but we just need to see what's going on the screen. This is where we're going to set that up. But again, be aware that you've got that control in place just so that you can see what's happening on your screen. You know, the viewfinder color. I've got my viewfinder color switched to off. I like having my LCD panel set to color so that I can get an idea of what my colors are looking like in the camera, but I leave my viewfinder set to off so that it's black and white inside of my viewfinder. That helps me a lot with critical focus, and also as I'm looking through the viewfinder, I'm just able to get a better sense of what's happening with my image. Chances are, if it looks good in black and white, it's probably going to look great in color, unless you've got some funky picture profile things going on, and we'll see a display inside of our LCD panel that'll tell us exactly what's going on. Okay, we've also got a viewfinder power option. Now what this means is that we can set this up so that whenever the LCD panel is open, the viewfinder panel is off. In other words, it shuts the power off to the viewfinder. This is a good way to save battery life. So if you're in a situation where battery life is important, every time you open up the LCD panel, it's going to turn off the viewfinder. When the LCD panel is closed, the viewfinder is active. So this will help extend your battery life. If battery life's not an issue, go ahead and run them both. That way you've got a couple of different ways to cross-check yourself with your image. Okay, the time remaining display. I've got this by default set to on. This allows me to know exactly how much time I've got left in my flash recording devices or whatever my storage is going to be. So I don't have to think about what my percentage of use is. It just gives me an immediate feedback on my screen. So I like having that. And then finally, display output. We have a couple of options here. What this does is it means that any of our display things, that means our shutter speed or our time code, etc., we can have it display only on the LCD panel, or we can set it up to send out to an external device. Maybe we've got the camera hooked up to a video village, or maybe we just simply want to send that information out for somebody who's taking notes and logging what our settings on our camcorder are. This is a way that we can send all of the data that's on the screen here out to other devices, out to our HDMI panel, or out to our RGB panel, or out to our video panel overall. So this allows us to take the display information and overlay it. So if we have it set up only to our LCD panel, it only displays here. If we set it up for all output, that means that this data goes out to everything, everywhere. We're going to leave this set up to all output. And that gets us through all of the different options in the display menus. So as we mentioned, really nothing that we have just set up in display affects anything that goes down to tape. It just simply is where we're going to set things up so that we can see things better and make better decisions about what's going on with our camcorder. Let's step off to the next menu option, and that's going to take us into our timecode U-bit setup. In the timecode U-bit setting menu, we've got some options that are pretty important that you understand if timecode is a big part of your workflow. If it's not, then you won't need to worry about these too much. But let's dive in, and you'll get an idea of what's going on inside the timecode U-bit menu settings, because there's quite a bit going on in there. So let's get into that particular menu. Okay, the first thing we've got timecode preset. We can have this camcorder start at 0, or we can create our own starting point. For instance, you might want to put a 1-hour offset on the camcorder. In order to do that, all we need to do is click over, and we'll set this up so that we've got an hour offset in there just like that. So there we've got a 1-hour offset, so we'll click on the next two items there, and we'll just click OK, and we're out of it. We can reset that just by going down to Reset. Go to Return. And this takes us down to our U-bit preset. We can do exactly the same thing in the U-bit preset. Next, timecode format. We've got a timecode format of drop frame and non-drop frame. Drop frame is what we typically use in the broadcast world. That means that we're running a frame at 2997, so we're dropping a frame at the end of each sequence. If you're working with a musician, it might be that they're used to working with non-drop frame, so it's a matter of what you're really trying to work with. So if somebody's composing for you, chances are pretty good that they're going to convert this over to NDF or non-drop frame. But I recommend that for most every instance that you're shooting just simply use drop frame. That's what the camera is set to for default. If you need more information about drop frame versus non-drop frame, you might want to go out and Google 2997 versus 30 frames per second, and you'll understand why we take some of the frames out for the drop frame mode. So let's get back out of here, drop frame. Next, TC run. So we've got a couple of different options here. First, we have what's called rec run. And what rec run does is whenever we hit record on the camcorder, it starts timecode at that point. If we use what's called free run, the camcorder records, or rather it pushes through timecode, whether it's in record mode or not. So the easiest way to understand what this means is rec run is designed to measure the amount of time we've actually recorded, and free run is how long we've had the camcorder turned on and operating. That's really the easiest way to describe the two differences between the two. Most situations use the rec run mode, but it might be that your particular production house requires that you use free run. There are other situations where we use free run, particularly if we're setting this up as a master camcorder and we're going to slave another unit off of it. So we'll come to that in just a little bit here. We're going to leave this set up to rec run. Next, we're going to step down to TC make. We've got a couple options here. We can preset the timecode, or we can regenerate the timecode. One of the things that you need to know here is that it's going to make new timecode every time we hit the record button, or every time we put in a new piece of media, it's going to start from a new timecode point. If we hit regenerate, what's going to happen is it's going to look at the last timecode that it was used on the card or on the recording media, or whatever stream happens to be in there, or just simply the last thing recorded, and it's going to start the timecode from that point in time. So this is how we get into regenerate right here. Just leave that set to preset. U-bit timecode record. Now we can determine whether we want to record the U-bit timecode or not. We're going to leave that off. And that gets us through all of the timecode menu functions, but that's not all there is to it. Now, this particular camcorder is set up so that it can be a master or a slave with another NXCAM in its class. All we need to do is on the front part of the camcorder, where we've got the RCA jack or the phono jack that's hidden underneath the front of the hand grip, we can set this up so that this one will be, for instance, the master. If that's the case, we're going to plug in that RCA cable from this camcorder over to the other camcorder. We're going to set this one up so that the switch is in the out position. We're going to put the other one in the in position. One needs to be an out, one needs to be an in. The camcorder that's in the out position is going to be the master. Okay, so we're going to set TC run and TC make into preset and free run mode. So let's come down here to TC run, and this is going to be